The day my husband died, I stood alone beside the dark wooden casket in the cold funeral home. The front rows were empty, not a single trace of my parents or my younger sister. They didn't come to say goodbye to Michael, the man who had loved me with all his heart and fought cancer until his very last breath. As I placed white flowers on the casket, I already knew where they were, raising champagne glasses at a luxury hotel, celebrating and preparing for Sophia's wedding, the golden child in their eyes. Before my grief could even settle, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother read, "Stop being dramatic. This is urgent. We need to discuss Michael's $750,000 trust fund for your sister's wedding." I froze. My own blood wanted to turn my husband's legacy of love into fuel for their vanity. If it were you, bearing the love of your life in solitude only to be met with such a demand, how would you respond? And now, as you listen to this story, where are you and what time is it? I need to know. I'm not alone. Hi, my name is Sandra. I was born and raised in a middle-class family in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a place where the red brick streets around Harvard Square are always alive with the sound of students' footsteps and the scent of steaming coffee drifting from small cafes. From the outside, people thought my family was the perfect picture. My father, Thomas, was a respected building contractor. My mother, Evelyn, worked as an accountant for a real estate firm, and both my sister and I, Sophia and Sandra, were given good educations. But only those inside the house knew the truth. That balance was just a facade. In the white three-story home tucked in a quiet neighborhood, there was a truth I felt even as a child. I had never been the center of my parents' eyes. From the moment Sophia cried her first cry, every glance, every smile, every bit of affection belonged to her. I was 2 years older, yet that gap was never enough to secure me any special place in their hearts. To them, Sophia was the little angel, the child with sparkling blue eyes, golden hair like a doll in a commercial, and a smile that could melt anyone's heart. And me, Sandra, with straight brown hair and a quiet nature, was most often mentioned only as the older sister who looks after her. From the moment she could speak, Sophia was showered with endless praise. Whenever my sister ran into the living room in a flared dress, twirling in circles, my mother would exclaim, "Oh my Sophia, you're so beautiful. One day you'll be a pageant queen." As for me, even if I brought home straight A's, my parents would only nod with indifference and say, "Good, but you can do better. Your sister is the real pride of this family." I still remember Sophia's 16th birthday, a day that taught me more about my place in the family than any lesson ever could. My parents handed her the keys to a brand new Toyota, tied with a bright red bow, parked in the driveway like a scene from a movie. Sophia screamed with joy and hugged them, while I stood on the porch, holding a tray of freshly baked cookies, forcing a smile onto my face. When I stepped down to congratulate her, my mother turned to me and said, "Sandra, watch and learn. Maybe someday you'll have something like this too." But when my own 16th birthday arrived, there was no car, no grand celebration, just a small cake my mother picked up from the store and a card with a few handwritten lines. By then, I was used to it. Still, deep down, I understood that the favoritism wasn't only about material things. It was about how my parents measured the worth of their children. Because Sophia was beautiful, charming, and able to make them proud at parties, she was cherished. Meanwhile, I was studious, diligent, quiet, and easy to overlook. My achievements were treated as if they were nothing more than expected. By the time I reached high school, I had already started working part-time at the local library. I shelved books, labeled them, wiped away dust, and sometimes tutored younger students to earn a little extra money. I saved every cent for my dream of going to college because I knew my parents wouldn't pay for me the way they did for Sophia. My father once told me bluntly, "Sophia needs to focus on building her image. You're always fine. If you can handle it yourself, then handle it yourself." Those words etched themselves into my mind like a stamp, a reminder that I was expected to shoulder everything alone while my sister was cushioned on a soft pillow. Those years taught me how to live independently. I cooked my own meals, managed my own money, and studied in the small attic room above the house. I still remember the smell of old paper in the library and the freezing winter nights when I walked home after my shift, my hands trembling but my heart steady with determination. Sometimes I wondered if my parents ever noticed my efforts, or if all the light had already been drawn toward Sophia. They bragged to the neighbors about beautiful Sophia, talented Sophia, but rarely mentioned me. I existed like a shadow, silent but present, and that silence made me the perfect choice whenever the family needed someone to carry a burden. Sometimes it was driving Sophia to her extracurriculars, sometimes handing over my savings to fix a computer, or simply giving my parents extra room in their budget for another grand party. All of it was considered what an older sister is supposed to do. I didn't protest, I didn't argue. Deep down, I kept hoping that one day my parents would see my worth. But year after year, that hope faded, replaced by a quiet callousness. And it was this injustice, this repeated favoritism, that planted the seed for everything that happened later. It taught me something important. In some families, roles are assigned very early. Sophia was the golden child, and I was only the faint shadow. That truth clung to me every day until the moment I finally left that house to find a real family in my own way. I left Cambridge and moved to New York to pursue a master's degree in healthcare management at Columbia University. The city was noisy and chaotic, but it gave me a rare sense of freedom, as if there I could begin a life no longer overshadowed by Sophia. In those early days, I spent most of my time in the massive Butler Library, studying and working part-time jobs to cover my living expenses. It was at a healthcare technology seminar that I met Michael Anderson. He was unlike anyone I had ever known. Michael wasn't flashy, didn't wear expensive suits like the finance or law students, but dressed simply in shirt sleeves, always carrying a notebook filled with lines of code and ideas. He was a software engineer working on a project to connect electronic medical record systems. As I passionately presented my research on hospital data management, I noticed him sitting in the back row, eyes focused, filled with curiosity. After the talk, Michael came up to me, extended his hand, and said, "What you just shared could truly change the way hospitals operate. I want to help you turn that idea into software." That was the beginning of a relationship I never imagined would shape the rest of my life. We started seeing each other more often, at first to exchange academic thoughts, later for walks through Central Park or quiet coffee dates in small cafes around Morningside Heights. Michael came from a working-class family in Ohio. His father was a mechanic, his mother a nurse. Nothing in his life had ever been easy, but he carried a patience and kindness I had never once received from my own parents. When I told him about being constantly compared to Sophia, he never interrupted or rushed to comfort me. He listened, truly listened. Then he said, "You don't have to prove your worth to them. You already have worth in the way you live your life." Those words became the anchor that steadied me whenever I felt weak. We fell in love, and when Michael proposed, it wasn't a grand spectacle with flashing cameras or the massive diamond ring Sophia had always dreamed of. Michael proposed to me on a quiet evening on the Brooklyn Bridge, with nothing more than a simple silver band. I cried not because of the ring, but because for the first time in my life, I felt chosen, placed at the very center of someone's heart. Our wedding was small and intimate, with only a few close friends, including Maya, my childhood friend who had always stood by me. My parents and Sophia were there too, but their faces stayed stiff, as if they were only fulfilling an obligation. After the ceremony, I overheard my mother whisper to a relative, "She really doesn't know how to choose. How could a software engineer possibly provide for her?" I heard it, and so did Michael, but he only squeezed my hand tighter. In that moment, I knew I had chosen right. He would never let cruel words shake his love for me. We began building a small but happy life together in a rented apartment near the hospital where I worked. Michael worked hard, slowly moving up in his healthcare tech company, while I managed nonprofit hospital projects. We didn't have mansions or luxury cars, but we had evenings spent cooking together, watching movies, and dreaming about the future. Michael often said, "We don't need much, just enough and each other." And I believed him, because for the first time in my life, I had a real family. But that happiness didn't last long. When Michael was diagnosed with cancer, my entire world collapsed. Yet even in pain, he kept thinking of me. Between exhausting treatments, he quietly worked with attorney Howard Ellison to set up a $750,000 trust money he had saved from his earnings, company shares, and life insurance. One evening, his hair thinning from chemotherapy, he told me, "I can't promise to be here forever, but I want to make sure you never have to go back to being their puppet. This is my legacy to you, a shield for your freedom." I cried in his arms, torn between agony and gratitude. The final months of Michael's life were the harshest I had ever endured. Our small apartment slowly transformed into a makeshift clinic, an IV pump stationed in the living room, a medicine cabinet crowded with vials of chemicals, and a hospital bed pushed up against the window so he could catch a glimpse of sunlight each day. I still went to work at the hospital, but I was running on empty. By day, I coordinated projects. By night, I stayed awake watching his breathing and his pain. I grew gaunt, my eyes sunken, my hair falling out from stress. Some nights I sat beside him, silently crying, still hoping that my family might show up, at least to ask how we were or offer some small help. But all I received was silence. Not once did my parents step into the hospital. Not a single phone call to check on us. Instead, what reached me were only biting remarks. In one curt text, my mother wrote, "Don't expect us to help you watch over anything. Sophia's wedding is the priority. Handle it yourself." My hands trembled as I read it, unable to believe a mother could say that when her daughter was exhausted from caring for a dying husband. My father was even colder. "Everyone must bear their own life. You chose Michael, so take responsibility for that choice." Those words cut like a blade, turning the pain I was carrying into a kind of sentence passed down on me. At the very moment Michael needed a wider circle of arms around him, all we had was each other and Maya, my childhood friend. Working night shifts in the ER, Maya still found time to bring us hot meals or stay for a few hours so I could get some sleep. It was Maya, not Sophia, who became the sister I truly had. And then the most terrible moment came. Michael took his last breath on an autumn morning as sunlight slipped through the curtains. I held his hand tightly and whispered, "You can rest now. I'll keep my promise." My heart shattered as if the whole world had collapsed. Yet even in my grief, my family still did not appear. The funeral was simple, held in a small chapel on the outskirts of town. The rows meant for my parents, my sister, and our relatives all stood empty. Not a single member of the Miller family came. Beside me, that day were Maya, a few coworkers, and Mrs. Green, the elderly neighbor who had always cared for me like her own. I looked around the silent room, overcome by a hollowness no words could capture. Michael deserved a proper farewell, with blessings from his wife's family. What he received instead was their cold absence. I vowed never to forget that moment. When the service ended, I returned to our apartment and placed the leftover white flowers on Michael's altar. I sank into a chair, exhausted. My mind was a blank space, aching and numb at once. But my family's cruelty didn't stop there. The phone on the table buzzed. I opened it and saw a message from my mother. "Stop being dramatic. This is urgent. That $750,000 fund is a reasonable source for Sophia's wedding. We need to talk now." I went numb. I had just buried my husband, not yet able to breathe after the storm of loss, and they were already plotting to seize the legacy he had left me. In their eyes, his death was only a minor inconvenience on the path to hosting a lavish wedding. They didn't see the trust fund as the lifetime sacrifice Michael had made for me, but only as a convenient wallet. I sat there, clutching the phone so tightly my hands trembled. Tears welled up, but they weren't only from grief anymore. They were from a betrayal so complete it hollowed me out. My own family, the people who should have held me in my darkest days, had turned me into an obstacle, a door to be forced open by taking the last thing Michael had left behind. I thought of all the times in my childhood they had treated me like a little bank, withdrawing my money, my effort, my time, without a word of thanks. And now they wanted to turn the legacy of my love into an ornament for Sophia's wedding. In that moment, I knew one thing. If I stayed silent one more time, I would lose everything. After Michael's funeral, our small apartment became a prison of memories. Every corner bore his presence, the gray coat still hanging on the rack, the coffee mug he used each morning still sitting by the machine, the unfinished software draft still open on the desk. I walked past everything, touching each item, and felt my heart tear open again. His absence wasn't an invisible void, it was a heavy, visible presence pressing the air from my lungs. And just when I thought I had no strength left, my mother's text about the $750,000 fund landed like a hammer blow, shattering the fragile hope that my family might finally come to me with love instead of calculation. I sat on the sofa, hugging a pillow, staring at the pale light spilling through the window. A flood of old memories spun through my head. I remembered how, back in high school, I saved up money from my part-time job at the library to buy SAT prep books. But when Sophia wanted a gown for the spring formal, my mother took my savings with the promise, "I'll pay you back." That money never returned. I remembered sophomore year of college, when my dorm needed an internet upgrade. I had been cutting back on meals, living frugally to cover my share, but my father called and said, "Can you send a little home? Sophia needs to pay for a European field trip." I sent it, afraid of being labeled the ungrateful child. In return, I ate instant noodles for a month. Then, when I started working at the hospital and got my first paycheck, my parents said the house needed a new roof, only for me to later discover they had used most of it as a down payment on Sophia's second car. Every time it was the same: I worked, I carried the load, and they treated it as normal. No one ever asked me, "Do you have enough? Are you tired?" And now, after everything, they wanted me to hand over the one thing Michael had left me, the culmination of a lifetime of work, foresight, and love. In the silence of the apartment, I felt myself standing at a crossroads. One path was familiar: continue surrendering, continue being the family's bank, continue letting injustice bury me. The other path was unknown, risky, but it held a chance, the chance to say no, for the first time in my life. I trembled with fear, but also felt a spark inside me that had never been there before. I realized I had grown used to living like a victim, enduring, staying silent. But Michael hadn't spent his life saving and setting up that trust just for me to be exploited again. He wanted me to be free, to live with my head held high. If I let my family take this money, I would be betraying not only Michael but myself. I knew that if I kept avoiding them, my family would only push further. After many sleepless nights, I decided to face them directly. I sent a short message in the family group chat: "We need to meet. Riverside Cafe, Saturday, 10 a.m. Riverside was a small coffee shop by the Charles River, not far from my apartment. I chose it because it was quiet, with plenty of private tables, and because it tied back to my childhood, the place where I used to study after school while Sophia was driven off to go shopping. This time, I chose Riverside as the place to begin drawing a new boundary. That morning was cold, the wind rippling silver waves across the river. I arrived early, sitting in my familiar corner seat, my phone set to record and tucked into my coat pocket. My heart was racing, not from fear, but from knowing that this time I would not stay silent. About 15 minutes later, my parents walked in. My father wore an old wool coat, his face stern and unreadable. My mother looked polished as always, her lipstick a bold shade of red. And right behind them came Sophia, draped in a luxurious fur coat, a designer bag dangling from her hand, her eyes sparkling as if she were stepping onto a red carpet rather than into a family confrontation. I greeted them briefly, then went straight to the point. Why was Michael's funeral the man who once called you mom and dad, the man who hoped to be treated like family, left with empty rows where his in-laws should have been? And yet, that same day, you all had the strength to raise champagne glasses at Sophia's hotel celebration? My voice was calm but edged with steel. For a few seconds, the air froze. My mother frowned. "Everyone grieves in their own way, Sandra. We chose not to come because we didn't want to make things heavier." My father cut in, his tone flat and clipped. "Sophia's wedding has been planned for a year. We couldn't cancel everything just because of a funeral. You should understand that. I looked straight at them, a wave rising in my chest. But before I could answer, Sophia spoke, and that was the moment that truly chilled me. She flicked her hair back, gave a dismissive laugh, and said, "Come on, Sandra. That fund is just sitting there. I need it for my future, for my new family. You don't have kids, you don't have big plans, what's the point of you keeping it?" Her words cut through the air like a blade, sharp and merciless. I felt my hands trembling under the table, but I drew in a deep breath and forced myself to stay calm. The phone in my coat pocket kept recording, capturing every word Sophia had just thrown at me. I turned to my mother. She didn't scold Sophia, didn't even flinch at her cruelty. She only tightened her grip on her purse strap, silently complicit. My father sipped his coffee, avoiding my eyes, letting the naked truth spill across the table unchecked. Slowly, I spoke. "So this is the real reason? Not concern for me, not to share in my grief, but to take away the last thing Michael left me." My mother's face pinched with irritation. "Don't be so dramatic, we are a family. If Sophia is happy, the whole family is happy. Michael would have wanted you to share with your sister." I laughed, a dry, bitter laugh. Michael left that fund for me, not for Sophia. He knew exactly what I went through in this family. He wanted me to be free, to stop being treated like a bank. And yet, on the day he died, you were absent, and immediately after, you demanded to take what little he left behind. You call that family? No one answered. The only sounds were the clink of a spoon against porcelain and the faint hum of jazz drifting from the speakers. I stood up, paid for my coffee, and looked at the three of them one last time. "I don't want to hear anything else. Everything is clear now. I will keep Michael's legacy." My voice was steady, no longer trembling the way it once had. They stared at me, surprised, a flicker of anger in their eyes, but I no longer cared. I walked out of Riverside, the cold wind striking my face, and yet inside me something burned bright, strength. When I got home, I pulled out my phone and replayed the recording. Every word Sophia had said about the fund just sitting there, every excuse my mother had made, it was all preserved. I sat in the silent apartment, and for the first time in months, I felt like I held a weapon. I was no longer fighting as a lone victim. I had evidence. I had undeniable truth. And I swore I would use it to protect Michael, and to protect myself. The next day, I took the recording to the office of Howard Ellison, the lawyer Michael had trusted. His building sat in the heart of Boston, a blend of old red brick and gleaming glass. I rode the elevator up to the 10th floor, my heartbeat quickening. When the dark wooden door opened, I stepped into a space that was elegant yet warm, lined with bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling, the scent of wood and old paper mingling with freshly brewed coffee. Howard, a man in his 60s with silver hair and round glasses, rose to greet me. He had worked with Michael for months to set up the trust, and when he saw me, his eyes softened with sorrow. "Sandra, I'm so sorry." Michael was one of the clients I respected most. "He prepared everything carefully so you would be able to stand strong after he was gone," he said, his voice deep and steady. I sat down, my hands tightening around my purse, and drew a shaky breath. "Mr. Ellison, my family. They're trying to take the trust." They didn't even show up at the funeral, but right after, they texted me demanding $750,000 for my sister's wedding. I recorded what they said at the cafe. "I don't know what they might try, but I'm scared." "Alon." Howard nodded and opened a thick file folder. He pulled out a white envelope marked "Letter of Intent, Michael Anderson," and slid it toward me. "Michael left this. It isn't a formal will, but a letter of intent. It carries legal weight in clarifying the purpose of the trust. Read it." My hands trembled as I opened it. Michael's familiar handwriting spilled across the page, every line precise. "If I pass away, the Brooks Family Education and Resilience Trust will be placed entirely under the control of my wife, Sandra Miller. This trust cannot be transferred to any third party, including members of either my family or Sandra's. Its sole purpose to protect Sandra, to provide a financial foundation for her to continue her life and pursue the community projects we both believed in. I read it over and over, tears streaming down my face as my hand brushed against his signature at the bottom. That was Michael, the man who thought of me even as death closed in. Howard watched me quietly, then continued. Sandra, there's something you need to know. Months ago, while Michael was still in the hospital, my office received a few calls. One from your parents' home phone, another from Sophia's number. They asked about the process of changing the trustee, in other words, how to replace you as the one in charge. We refused and explained it wasn't possible. But the truth is, they had been planning this for a long time. They didn't just react after Michael's death, they were calculating while he was still breathing. Hearing that, a wave of rage and cold realization crashed over me. So their absence at the hospital, their icy silence, wasn't just about Sophia and the wedding. They had been circling the money all along. Every look, every clipped remark from my parents suddenly snapped into focus. I had never been their daughter, only a path to resources. I lifted my head, my eyes dry now, and said firmly, I will not sign anything. I will not give in. This is Michael's legacy. I will protect it at any cost. Howard nodded, a flicker of relief on his face. That's exactly what Michael wanted. I'll stand with you. If they try any legal move, we have more than enough grounds to shut it down. I took out my phone and played the Riverside recording for him. Sophia's voice filled the quiet office, sharp and selfish. That fund is just sitting there. I need it for my future. Howard's brow tightened. Good. This will be key evidence. Keep recording every interaction. People like that rarely stop on their own, but we'll be ready. Hell with. I left his office and stepped into the crowded street. The cold wind still blew, but inside me a new strength burned. I could almost feel Michael walking beside me, holding my hand, whispering, Don't let them take this from you. For the first time since he died, I no longer felt cornered. I had evidence, I had an attorney, and more importantly, I had resolve. My family might plot, might threaten, but I would not break. I had spent my whole life as a victim now, no more. I had thought that after the cafe meeting, after seeing the evidence and learning Michael's clear intent, my family would back off. I was wrong. Not only did they refuse to stop, but they struck back harder, this time with public tactics meant to smear my name. One early morning, as soon as I unlocked my phone, I saw a Facebook post from my mother's own account. A picture of a lit candle, with the words, Praying for our eldest daughter Sandra, who hasn't been stable since losing her husband. Please keep her in your prayers. Hundreds of sympathetic comments and shares poured in. Old friends left messages of support without having any idea of the truth. Blood rushed to my face as I stared at the screen. With just a few vague sentences, my mother had turned me into a woman supposedly out of control, someone in need of guardianship and pity. No one in those comments knew that I was still showing up at work every day, still standing strong, simply refusing to hand over Michael's money to Sophia. Before I could recover, I got a call from the hospital's HR department. The director's voice was careful. Sandra, yesterday we received a call from your father, Mr. Thomas. He expressed concern that you might be unable to focus after your husband's death, that the loss could make you prone to mistakes affecting patients. We trust you, but we're required to ask, are you all right? Do you need time off? I bit my lip, forcing down the trembling in my body. My father had gone this far, calling my HR department, planting doubt about my competence in the very place I worked. If the hospital believed him, I could lose my job. I took a deep breath and answered calmly. I'm completely focused and performing my duties well. If necessary, I can provide my most recent performance evaluations. After the call ended, I sat in a daze. My family didn't just want the money, they wanted to destroy my credibility, to push me into weakness so they could control me more easily. But their cruelty didn't stop there. I discovered that Sophia and her fiancé, Brandon, had been using their connections in real estate to probe the bank, asking directly about the accounts and the trust in my name. They weren't given any details, but the mere fact that they tried showed how blatant the intrusion had become. Brandon even let it slip at a party. Sandra will have to hand it over soon. That money won't stay with her for long. Rumors began to spread through our circles. At work, I caught the sidelong glances of a few colleagues who had heard whispers that I was unstable after my husband's death, that I might be leaving, that I could lose control of the trust. It was like a dense web tightening around me. Some nights I sat alone in the apartment, staring at the pile of documents Michael had left, feeling as though I couldn't breathe. I had lost my husband, been painted as unhinged by my own family, and was still fighting to protect his legacy. Yet, when the darkness nearly swallowed me whole, two small lights still shone. Maya and Mrs. Green. Maya would stop by after her shift, bringing me a hot meal and a firm hug. She would say, "Sandra, I see you at the hospital every day focused, helping patients. Don't let those lies define you." Her words were like medicine, pulling me back from the edge. Mrs. Green, my 70-year-old neighbor, quietly became a living witness to the truth. She had watched me take Michael to treatment again and again, watched me go to work in the snow and rain, watched the light in my apartment still burning at 2 a.m., while I graded research papers. One day, she knocked on my door and placed an old notebook on my table. "I have a habit of keeping a daily journal," she said, "and I've written down many times when I saw you going to work, caring for Michael. If you ever need it, use it. Don't be afraid, you're not alone." I opened its pages and saw trembling lines. "Today, Sandra took Michael to the hospital. Came back late, but still worked the morning shift. Such a resilient girl." Each entry felt like an embrace, a confirmation that I wasn't crazy, wasn't weak, just a woman being slandered. Looking back, I understood that my family had chosen open warfare, and I could retreat no further. The posts, the phone calls, the rumors all were aimed at isolating me, making me look helpless so they could strip the trust away. That night, as I turned off the light and pulled the blanket up, trying to find a few scraps of sleep, a sudden pounding echoed at the door. The clock showed nearly midnight. My heart jumped, and I went to the window. Under the yellow glow of the street lamp stood the familiar figure of my mother, Evelyn, clutching her handbag, shifting anxiously as she knocked. For a moment I hesitated, then I opened the door. She stepped inside, the heavy scent of her perfume flooding the small apartment, a smell so familiar from my childhood, one I had tried hard to forget. "My daughter," she began, her voice syrupy sweet, nothing like the sharp tone she usually carried. "I know we've had our misunderstandings, but you must understand, all it takes is for you to sign a few papers, and everything will settle down. Your sister will be happy, the family will be at peace. You don't want to see this family fall apart, do you?" I quietly led her into the living room. The lamp on the table cast a soft glow. I nodded toward the couch for her to sit, but inside my coat pocket, my hand had already switched on the recorder. After everything they had done, I knew any conversation could turn into a trap, and I needed the truth preserved. She went on, placing her hand on my shoulder, patting it as if in comfort. "Sophia has sacrificed so much, can't you see? She needs a perfect wedding, a beautiful beginning. Brandon is a successful man, a son-in-law the whole family can be proud of. If this ceremony is affected, we'll all lose face. And you, Sandra, you don't have children, you don't need much. Your sister's wedding is a joy for the whole family. Just sign, and everything will be fine." I looked straight into her eyes and saw the ambition burning there, barely disguised beneath her gentleness. Calmly, I asked, "If Michael were still alive, would you dare ask him to sign? This trust was created for me, not for Sophia. Why are you so insistent?" For a moment, she faltered, her composure slipping, then hurriedly tried to change the subject. But in her flustered state, she let slip something she hadn't meant to reveal. "Brandon already booked the Hilton Head Resort for the wedding. Without the money, we'll lose the deposit, lose face. Do you understand? Lose face in front of the entire real estate circle. Our family can't survive that." Her words rang out clear, unmistakable, and, most importantly, recorded. I sat there, nodding as if in agreement, while inside me a storm raged. So it wasn't about Sophia's happiness at all, It was about protecting their social image, covering for shallow ambitions. Hilton Head, deposits, reputation in front of friends, all of it mattered more than my grief, more than the bonds of family. I let out a long sigh, stood, and poured a glass of water, placing it gently on the table before her. I understand. You should get some rest. It's late. My mother looked at me, clearly convinced that her sugary words had softened me. She smiled faintly. I knew you'd come around. Don't be so stubborn. Rest well, my daughter. Then she left, stepping into the dark hallway, her perfume lingering in the air. When the door closed behind her, I sank into the chair, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone to check. Everything had been captured, her coaxing, her insistence, and the slip about the Hilton Head resort. I replayed it again and again, feeling both sorrow and a chill down my spine. The woman who had given birth to me, who had once cradled me in her arms, was now standing fully on my sister's side, willing to come at midnight to deceive and manipulate me. But this time, she had exposed her true face. One early weekday morning, just as I returned from a long hospital shift, a pounding knock rattled the door. I opened it to find a court officer standing there, a sealed envelope in his hand. "Mrs. Sandra Miller?" he asked. I nodded, and seconds later I was holding a document I will never forget. A petition. My parents and sister had officially filed for emergency guardianship. They claimed I had lost the ability to make rational decisions after my husband's death, that I was mentally unstable and a danger to both the assets and myself. I read each line, my chest tightening as if crushed. So all the slander online and at my workplace had been nothing but groundwork. This was their killing blow. To strip me of my legal capacity and steal Michael's trust. The Cook County Court set the hearing just 1 week later. I remember that morning clearly. I wore a plain black dress, my hair neatly tied back, dark circles under my eyes but a fire in my gaze. I didn't walk in alone. Maya held my hand as we entered, Mrs. Green sat quietly in the back row, and Attorney Ellison walked beside me, a thick file in his hands. Across the room, my parents sat together, with Sophia and her fiancé Brandon behind them. I glanced over and saw the confidence in their faces, as if victory was already theirs. The hearing opened with the plaintiff's case, my family. My father stood first, his voice forced into a somber tone. Your Honor, we are only concerned for our eldest daughter. Since losing her husband, she has been unstable, crying, withdrawn, at risk of dissipating the large sum her husband left behind. We only wish to protect her. My mother sat beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief as though rehearsed for a role. Then they called a witness, a distant cousin who had once studied with me in Cambridge. She testified. I once saw Sandra sobbing uncontrollably in a hospital hallway, saying she didn't know how she could go on if Michael died. I believe she is no longer capable of managing herself. I sat still, my hands clenched tightly, a faint smile tugging at my lips. They had seen one moment of tears and decided my entire life had collapsed. When it was our turn, Ellison rose, his voice firm and resonant. Your Honor, my client Mrs. Sandra Miller is fully competent. We have complete evidence to prove it. He presented the file, beginning with Michael's letter of intent. The document, with Michael's clear words and signature, appeared before the judge. Sandra is the sole beneficiary. The trust cannot be transferred or interfered with by either family. It was our first piece of evidence, strong and undeniable. Next, Ellison introduced Mrs. Green's journal. The elderly woman with silver hair trembled slightly as she stepped to the stand, but her gaze was steady. She recounted, day by day, how she had watched me go to work, take Michael to treatment, and then return home to cook and care for him. If that's what we call incompetence, she said firmly, then no one in this world is truly sane. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I looked up at her, tears filling my eyes, overwhelmed with gratitude that I was not alone. Then Ellison gave me a small nod, and I handed him my phone. He pressed play. Sophia's voice rang out, sharp and undeniable. That fund is just sitting there. I need it for my future. Then came the second recording, captured at midnight, my mother's slip. Brandon already booked the Hilton Head Resort without the money. We'll lose the deposit, lose face. The courtroom fell utterly silent. All their sweet words about protecting me lay exposed for what they truly were, not concern, but greed and vanity. I watched Sophia's face flush red, my mother drop her gaze, and my father grip the armrest, his eyes burning with anger. But Ellison wasn't finished. He produced a bank report showing my account had been accessed without authorization. The contact number used matches that of Miss Sophia Miller, he stated firmly. This is not about safeguarding a daughter. This is a deliberate scheme to interfere with her assets. The judge's brow furrowed as he flipped through the documents, his expression hardening. After hours of testimony and rebuttal, the gavel struck. The judge's voice carried through the chamber. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied. Furthermore, this court orders the Miller family to cease all contact with Sandra Miller and her assets. An investigation will be opened into perjury, invasion of privacy, and unauthorized access to financial accounts. I sat frozen, my heart pounding in my chest before slowly releasing. For the first time in months, I felt justice standing firmly on my side. When the hearing ended, Maya threw her arms around me and whispered, "You did it. Michael would be so proud." Mrs. Green clasped my hand, her eyes shining with joy. "You see? The truth will always prevail." I smiled through tears that still blurred my vision. My family shuffled out of the courtroom, bitter and furious, but this time they had no power left to wield over me. I knew the battle wasn't entirely finished, but the turning point had come. I was no longer the hunted victim. I had stood up. I had protected what Michael left me. And more than anything, I had reclaimed my own voice. After the court denied the guardianship petition and ordered an investigation, everything began to crumble for the Miller family. Word spread quickly through their social circles and the small Cambridge community. Sophia, once used to admiration, became the subject of gossip. Brandon, her fiancé, who cared deeply about image and reputation, couldn't handle the pressure. Just weeks later, he quietly broke off the engagement, citing that he couldn't build a future with a family mired in scandal and lawsuits. Sophia screamed, sobbed, and called me dozens of times, leaving long messages filled with blame. "This is all your fault. If you hadn't resisted, if you had just signed over the fund, the wedding would have happened and Brandon wouldn't have left me." I read those messages, my heart heavy but no longer guilty. For the first time, I understood clearly that protecting myself was not a sin, it was my rightful claim. Meanwhile, cracks began to form between my parents. My father, furious that the guardianship scheme had failed, lashed out at my mother. "You couldn't keep your mouth shut, you exposed the Hilton Head Resort." My mother fired back with bitterness. "You were useless in court, couldn't convince the judge, and let Sandra bring in evidence to destroy us." The house that had once echoed with hollow laughter was now filled with shouting. Relatives kept their distance, extended families stayed silent. And Sophia, once the golden child, was now a name tied to failure and shame. Then one late evening, my phone lit up with a message from my mother. "Sandra, I'm sorry, things went too far. Please give the family another chance. Let's sit down for a meal together, start fresh." I read those words again and again, feeling the weakness in every letter. But instead of softening, I saw the insincerity beneath the apology. They weren't sorry for abandoning me at Michael's funeral or for trying to steal his trust. They were only sorry because they had failed, because their reputation was ruined. I picked up the phone and typed my reply slowly but firmly. "If there are any matters to discuss, contact Attorney Ellison. I will not be part of any more family dinners. What I need is peace, not the same old cycle." I pressed send and set the phone down. What I felt wasn't hatred, only relief. I realized forgiveness doesn't mean allowing the same harm again, and saying no doesn't mean carrying hate, it means setting boundaries. In the days that followed, my parents called a few more times, and Sophia left messages with a choked voice. But I didn't answer. I poured my energy into my work at the hospital, into the new foundation, into projects that made me feel Michael still lived through everything I did. One afternoon, I stood at the window watching the rush of people on the street below and thought. For years, I had lived chasing their approval, hoping to be invited to the family table, hoping to be seen as a true daughter. All I ever received in return was coldness, exploitation, and betrayal. It was time to stop waiting. I also realized something important. By cutting ties, I hadn't lost a family, I had only let go of the illusion of one. I had Maya, I had Mrs. Green. I had colleagues who still asked me to lunch. I had students who would one day receive scholarships from the foundation. That was my real family, the family I chose, not bound by blood but by love. A year ago, if someone had told me I would have the courage to refuse my own mother, I would have laughed through tears. But now, having drawn clear boundaries, I felt stronger than ever. I no longer let anger consume me. I turned it into determination. I no longer sought revenge. I chose peace. The Miller family could keep drowning in their arguments and blame, but I would no longer be a part of it. I lit a small candle beside Michael's photo and whispered, "I did it. I no longer let them define me." The flickering flame reflected his gentle smile in the frame, and I knew that somewhere he was nodding in agreement. A year later, autumn came to Boston, the sky clear blue and the trees lining the street in front of the hospital blazing orange. I walked through the main lobby, holding a small invitation card. The inauguration of the Michael Brooks Memorial Lab. His name was printed boldly on the paper, framed by soft blue designs, Michael's favorite color. Just seeing it made my heart tremble. I drew a deep breath and stepped into the auditorium, where colleagues, friends, and donors had gathered. The new lab, on the hospital's third floor, was spacious and bright, filled with servers and large screens connected to the electronic medical record system. All of it had been purchased through the foundation I had spent the past year building. When the red curtain dropped and the words Michael Brooks Memorial Lab appeared, the room erupted in applause. I stood in the middle of the crowd, raising my head to look at those words, my eyes blurring not from despair this time, but from pride. In that wave of applause, I could almost hear Michael's footsteps, his laughter as he talked about technology that could save lives. At the ceremony, we also announced the first scholarship in Michael's name. A sophomore in health IT walked up to the stage. She was a slender young woman, her eyes shining though her hands trembled. Her name was Elena, from a poor immigrant family. Her parents were laborers who had never imagined their daughter could even attend college. Elena choked back tears as she said, "I never thought I'd have this chance. But with this scholarship, I can keep chasing my dream. I want to use technology to save lives, just like Michael did." The hall fell silent, then erupted in applause. I covered my mouth, tears spilling down, but for the first time in so long, I cried while smiling. I saw Michael in Elena's eyes, that simple belief that technology and compassion could change the world. When the event ended, I stayed behind after everyone had left. I walked around the room, running my fingers across the keyboards, watching each screen glow, listening to the soft hum of the machines. I whispered, "Michael, do you see? I kept my promise. You're still here in every device, in every student, in every person helped." For the first time, I could say his name without breaking down, smiling instead, a smile of relief, overflowing with love. Later that evening, I carried a bouquet of fresh flowers to the cemetery where Michael rested. Autumn leaves blanketed the path. I knelt before his gravestone, laying the white blossoms against the grass. His name was etched clearly alongside the words, "Beloved husband, visionary soul." I pressed my hand to the cold stone, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Michael, I kept my promise. I protected the trust, turned it into a foundation, into a lab, into a scholarship. I found a true family not through blood, but through love and choice. I am no longer alone." The wind brushed past, tugging gently at my clothes. In that moment, I didn't feel the searing pain of the early days, but instead a strange calm, as though he were smiling at me from somewhere far away. I stayed there for a long while, letting the autumn leaves fall around me, letting the silence hold me close. When I finally stood, my heart felt lighter, as if I had set down a burden I had carried for years. I knew the road ahead was still long, but now I had the strength to walk it. That night, back in the apartment, I cooked a simple meal, lit a candle, and opened my journal. I wrote the final lines of the day. 1 year later, I am no longer the grieving widow, no longer the daughter exploited by her family. I am the keeper of Michael's legacy, the one who turned pain into purpose. And above all, I am someone who has learned to choose family with my heart, not just by blood. When I set down the pen, I smiled softly, knowing my healing had finally begun. Thank you for listening to Sandra's story. Wishing you health and happiness, and I look forward to sharing more stories with you soon.